So there's just a few things I want to talk to you about today, and then there's other things tomorrow. But this will serve as a good introduction. So for those of you who don't know me really quickly, I've been a professor of renewable energy technology for 32 years at Oakland Community College, where the auto executives and engineers lived. Some of them now unemployed auto executives and engineers. And it's also on the border with Detroit. I run the Detroit Green Skills Alliance for Metropolitan Detroit, trying to move the whole region to a more sustainable community. I also work with the Seed Center, and originally, with a few of you in this room, we used to send them things at the American Associations of Community Colleges to get them to put on a green and sustainability webpage, so there'd be something there. And then it got too big when all this push out of money came to train the green workforce, so we went to them and said, actually walked in the door with a colleague who had money and said, we have to do something more robust so that not all 1,200 community colleges call the American Wind Energy Association for the exact same piece of information, et cetera. So we put together what's called the Sustainability Education and Economic Development Initiative, and that's what SEED stands for, Sustainability, Education, and Economic Development. You'll see tomorrow that I work with a number of other national networks in multiple sectors of society. But for today, let's focus on the American Association of Community College and the resources that we bring to you that will help you move forward so that we can have a more sustainable future for ourselves and for others. So this is a coordinated national strategy to support community colleges, and you'll notice it's not just about educating for the green workforce, it's actually to build a green and sustainable economy. Because if we don't do that, there will not be market demand for our students. And as many of you have experienced, we've seen the push out of the training funds, much of which is now drying up. But we were also supposed to see legislation simultaneously that was going to put a price on pollution in such a way that there would be natural market demand for all of our students. That legislation did not pass. The climate change legislation did not pass. The PACE legislation could not pass. PACE is a property assessment financing mechanism that the same way when you put sewers in a community, you don't have to pay for the whole thing up front. With PACE, you could do weatherization throughout a whole community, and if you wanted to, renewables and other green efforts, and it would go into the property taxes of the homeowner. So it was a financing mechanism that had been set up in over 36 states that was going to create this. Mr. and Mrs. Jones, you can continue to throw money away to the utility company, or you can do weatherization on your house and perhaps renewable energies too, and by the way, you don't have to pay for it up front. It goes onto your property taxes. Your utility bill savings are greater than the payments on your property taxes, so you can either have more money in your pocket every month by doing weatherization and renewables, or you can throw money away to the utility company. Which one works for you? And that would have created this massive market demand. But with the meltdown of the economic system and the mortgage system, that Fannie Mae Freddie Mac group said we can't have that as a lien in the front of our mortgages that are already underwater. So we talk about the need for a financing mechanism to build market demand. We need them. And we need them in a variety of ways, in the residential and in the commercial and in the small business sectors, so that we can build robust local green economies that have strong demand for all of your students. So I wish I could tell you that all that legislation passed, but it didn't. And what that means is there's an opportunity for us, in fact, a necessity for us to help build these strong green economies so that our programs will have success, not only in the quality of the curricula, but also in job placement, internship placement, and building a more sustainable life for all of us. So there's components to this SEED initiative. One is the leadership. So your presidents sign on, and we have over 440 college presidents that have signed on. There's no fee for this one, folks. So how many of you are a SEED signatory? Raise your hand. Okay, so this is so easy. You go back and you say, this is from your American Association of Community Colleges. If you sign on, you get a bunch of free resources, no cost. So this should be the one that's the truly low-hanging fruit, no-brainer. And what we did is pulled together tools for your leaders if they want to use them, and if not, nudge them along. Secondly, we put together this resource center, and I'll show you more about that. And then we have a sharing community where you can connect with others who are working on similar items so you don't have to create them from scratch. How many of you have been to the website of the Seed Center? Would you raise your hand? Okay, only about half of you. So here's all the colleges that have already signed on. And as you can see, it's close to half of all of the community colleges, between a third and a half of all the community colleges in the country, which is great. And what it gives you is access to curricular and other resources. We have amazing webinars, and they're all recorded, so you can watch them afterwards if you've missed them. Scholarship opportunities to attend workshops. And I didn't know about this till I read Todd's slide, but discounts and free rides to various national conferences as a presenter. That's pretty sweet, right? Especially as our travel funds decrease. And then we also have technical assistance, college-to-college mentoring, and much more that comes out of this Seed Center for you. So we're really, think of us as your support system to help you be more successful in all of your sustainability efforts. We have a focus now on policy, because there's been a focus on the last year or two of getting sustainability on your campuses and then getting your curricula going and all the other pieces you saw on STARS. But without policy, you're not going to have the market demand for your students. And you don't want to have those enrollment issues and job placement issues that may weaken your ongoing strength of your program. So a lot of the policy is being done now on the state and the local levels, but we also have a lot to do to prepare ourselves for the moment, and it's coming, when there will be opportunity again on the national level. And on some key legislation, we've seen how community colleges can make a big difference. We're often we are always one of the main economic engines in town, the community college. And so elected people listen to us. And there are hundreds of cities and states, I would say thousands actually if you include cities, that are considering new policies that will drive demand so your students can have jobs. Now you can understand this, I've been doing this 32 years. So in the 80s we went through this. This is my third round at this. And the piece that we were missing was the policies in place. So that's why I'm so excited about this community of action that you could be a part of. The other thing is democracy only works if you have engaged people. So we have 4 target audiences for our community of action around policy. One is your presidents and their governmental relations office. I mean, it was great. We had a bunch of presidents who called their elected representatives about some key legislation, and they made a difference. They changed their vote. Secondly, your faculty, because they teach a lot of issues related to sustainability in their classrooms, but then they take a test or they write a paper, the students, they don't learn to become change agents in the community. And since this is a democracy, we can do learning assignments around share what you've learned. So for example, we have an international movement called Transition Towns, which is helping local towns to move off of fossil fuels. That all started because a group of students put together a plan on how their city could get off of fossil fuels. They went and presented it to their city council adopted it. I have so many stories of young people who do real-world problem solving around civic engagement, economic development, as well as policy, and have made a difference. So community colleges can be a critical voice, and our policy action group is going to have all sorts of positive outcomes for you, and also all sorts of activities to support you. So we're going to start out with, we've already had a webinar, we're doing listening, we've connected with the STEM community and the 4-year colleges as well. We're not the only ones doing this policy work. We're connecting with NRDC and a bunch of other outstanding national groups of experts who really know what's going on, because otherwise how do you know how to get involved in policy? But also show you the strategies of how to work with your state energy offices. Why is it that there's a Public Service Commission made up of 3 people who do the regulations of the utilities? Why are our utilities monopolies? And why don't they have a privileged position as monopolies and oligopolies, but yet they aren't serving the community because they have to run by the rules of the game, which is if they're private utilities, make money for their shareholders. And when the laws are made, oftentimes at the meetings, they're there because it's their vested interest. The fossil fuel companies are there. It affects all of our rate structures. It affects our job placements. We're not there. So guess which policies get produced? Those things that support the existing fossil fuel subsidized infrastructure instead of what we could be doing with greener technologies. So that's a bit of a generalization, but that really is the norm throughout the country. And we have these great examples in many states of where people have started showing up in the meetings or have sent in testimony or have done other ways of communicating with the policymakers and have helped to shift the system. So if we aren't doing that, then we're kind of teaching this stuff up here, and we're teaching the technicians, and we're not teaching this main piece we need to teach. And technicians can learn this too. It doesn't have to just be in the political science class or the psychology class or the economics class. Every discipline has a unique and important role to help create a sustainable future, and we can give you the tools to help you do that. Because here's the kinds of policies that are going on. And the decisions that are made around these policies will directly affect whether your students get jobs. They'll directly affect whether their employers will open up the green divisions of the business. Was this from your site? No, I think it's the Pew Center. Yeah, nice slide. So we wrote a toolkit for you that actually lays out the different steps. So those of you who like to read things and learn about it instead of just hear about it, please do me a favor, go read this toolkit. A bunch of us wrote it, but Todd and I like sweat over it, and we want your feedback about what else you need to help you move forward on this. So give us feedback on it. But it's really quite good. It's got a lot of wonderful, and if you just go to theseedcenter.org, theseedcenter.org, then click on resources, and then you'll see where it says toolkits. And there it is, or email me, I'll send it to you if you didn't get that link. We have another toolkit that's coming up about how to use the campus as a living lab. It actually should say the campus and the community as a living lab for sustainability. We also have a workshop coming up in April on presidents and senior administrators. So if you have a president or a senior administrator who's gung-ho, get them to go to that workshop because their voice there will help set the tone. If they aren't, if they're resistant, get them to go to that workshop so that they can understand the precedents and the support that's there for them. Hey, you might get some money if you go to that workshop because, you know, they'll be talking about policies. Or you might get some, learn about other presidents all around the country who are doing the same thing. You know, these people want to talk to their colleagues lots of times as well, right? That is this annual meeting of AACC. So it's the April 21st to the 24th. I think this workshop's on the 20th. So you got to catch them before they make their plane reservation for AACC so they can sign up for this, CEOs, Guiding Green Institutions. Okay. Then we also have coming up for you a Genome Initiative. This is like, we already have a couple papers on the Seed Center on what are the components of a quality green program. So that's already there for you. I can point you to it if you want. But there's also a Genome Initiative where we're really driving down in the DNA of how do you build a regional green economy. We already have a lot there for you, but we have even more coming out, and that's very important work. I'll talk about that tomorrow. And then just a couple more things. We're going to have awards. The application for the awards are going to be released at AACC's convention in April. There will be 4 winners with dollars of each. They'll be announced in the fall, and they're going to be in the following categories: community engagement, deep community engagement. We're looking for, not kind of a little surface thing where you have like one little partnership with one company, more like along the David Orr stuff. But, you know, apply with whatever you've got, because we'll collect those examples and use them for precedents. You're all doing lovely things that other community colleges don't know about. We want to toot your horn. We're also really good, by the way, if you have somebody who's standing in the way, making a phone call, praising the green work that you've been doing, and telling them we want to highlight them. We were wondering about this little piece. You know, you tell us what to say we can say it to support you in your work. Governance, so that you've institutionalized to this work. Program design and delivery, pretty obvious. That could be curricular and also co-curricular, and these strategic partnerships. So there's our emails. And please feel free to contact us. And you'll hear more tomorrow, but I think that's a beginning introduction. Thank you.
And I like the idea of seed kind of goon squad, you know, to come in and remove folks who are in the way. And I will happy to volunteer to be part of that, because people don't know this here, but actually Johnson County Community College, the sustainability department is also the body disposal department. Because we have a big hole in the ground out there as our green infrastructure project. We have a big industrial composter that you can go into and be ground into compost.
Organ donation.
Or so we can play an important role if you know, some folks are becoming too much of an obstacle for you. This is a tough crowd. I was pretty proud of that. Yeah.
We were thinking hard about who it was.
About who? All right. Deb has gotten us sort of thinking about the incredibly important linkages between policy changes and the market demand for the kinds of jobs that we're training our students for. A lot of the variability that you're hearing around tables in terms of workforce development and placement have to do with state and local incentives and how variable they are across the country. And so this is a terribly important conversation. Now, to give us a national perspective on this, we're going to be hearing from Ashok Gupta from the NRDC, who handles policy on a national level for them. Ashok has been kind enough to spend a fair amount of time with us here at Johnson County Community College as an advisor, and to help us make sure that we keep our vision broad. And so with no further ado from me, please welcome Ashok Gupta.
I've gotten to know Jay because I visit Kansas City a lot, because this is where my wife's from, and so over the last few years I've really learned, at least more in the context of Johnson County Community College. I reside in New York City, in Manhattan, on 10th Street. Very different place for which to do this work. I've been with NRDC about 20 years now. My background originally was, physics and math, and then economics. I taught high school for a while. I worked for the city of New York for a while, but then really got into policy 20-some years ago. And NRDC does do a lot of work at the state and local level, because we know working at the federal level is not going to get us there. And things have to change on the ground before they'll change in Washington. So I think really in the next few years especially, the more that we can do on the ground, the more stories we can have, the more local elected officials can hear about what's working, the more likely we are to succeed on federal policy. It's going to be a lift, but it is doable, and it's important to do, but it's all going to come from the bottom up. So the favorite phrase these days is winning on the ground. You have to win on the ground. You have to win in parts of the country that normally don't get attention. So, focusing on the Midwest, the Southeast, the mountain states, it's not just the coasts, not the Northeast and California. We need to really show that this works on the ground, and that's going to be key. So, so we've done, and the other thing is, in terms of many of the policy instruments, you actually get more done on the ground, because if you look at energy and utilities, utilities are regulated at the state level. I mean, there's some federal policy that can be helpful, but most of the hard work on what happens on policy and electric and gas utilities is at the utility commissions. We're in 20 states doing utility regulatory policy, because we know that's where change happens when it comes to policy. And utilities have to be key partners, and I'll come back to that, but if you're trying to solve some of the financing issues and other challenges, if utilities aren't your partner, it's going to be 10 times harder to do, and how utilities are regulated will determine whether they're going to be partners or not. So we'll come back to that. Cities and mayors are hugely important in terms of things they can be doing. My example is City of New York and Mayor Bloomberg, who's just been phenomenal in terms of sustainability issues that's driving the investment in clean energy in New York because we got some good policies in place. And those things can happen at the city level, mayoral level, city council level, and we don't have to go the full 9 yards. Even if they're just small incremental policies, they can help really shape what happens in terms of the community, in terms of investment of dollars. So we'll come back to that. So winning on the ground, key, national policy, something we can come back to. I mean, in the near term, we're not going to get, a cap and trade, a carbon tax. We may get a clean electricity standard, like a renewable electricity standard in 2 or 3 years if we're lucky. But we have to work towards those policies and keep those in mind. And for us, it's also being strategic in terms of where we invest our time in terms of states. We're focused on, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Colorado, swing states, which we know are going to be important politically in Washington in terms of what happens. So we're going to put resources and time and effort in targeted states. But that doesn't mean every state isn't going to be important in terms of moving a key legislator. But going back to the idea of winning on the ground, winning, getting mayors on board is going to be a very, very important part of the strategy going forward. I'm not going to say anything about big trends. You heard David Orr brilliantly talk about all of the big issues that we're dealing with globally. We all know that, especially what the public cares about in terms of high gasoline prices, oil and oil security will always be a very, very, very important theme. We know that competitiveness and jobs will always be a very, very important theme. So how everything we're working on ties into our dependence on oil or ties into being competitive and creating jobs. And the other one is urbanization. I mean, certainly from a global perspective and working in cities where people live and work, making cities work better. You hear that over and over again. It's going to be such a key theme in terms of how we make progress. And I mean, again, living in New York City where the density is so huge, the impact you can have by focusing on just existing buildings in New York City and how much energy they use is just, phenomenal. And if you can come up with a plan to do that, that can have huge impact. And in New York City, because we've focused to the point of saying, okay, how do we get to, enough scale, and how do you make change happen? In New York City, 2% of our buildings, if you look at the total number of buildings, have 50% of the square footage. So we decide let's go with buildings over 50,000 square feet first. Not because big buildings are necessarily the most important, but you can have more impact by focusing on fewer targets and try to bring them in as allies. So you have to kind of be very strategic about where you can have change, how you can have the fewest opponents, how can you go talk to the top 20 owners, 10 owners. What relationship does the university have to those large building owners in the community? Who are the largest tenants in those buildings? There probably are banks or other major companies that are affiliated with the university. So you need to kind of break down the immediate community in terms of who are the key stakeholders and decision makers and how to get them to be allies in the effort rather than opponents, or just basically mostly not even aware or not even paying attention. So the convening function of a university can be a great way to say, if we want to deal with buildings, existing building, their energy and water use and waste issues, and it's existing buildings, not just new construction, who do we want at the table? How do we get them involved? So you have to be incredibly strategic in terms of choosing what you're doing. The role of policy is critical. I mean, we know that if we want scalable impact, we have to have the solutions. I think most of us know what the solutions are. They're not solutions, we have to innovate and come up with new ideas, but there are ideas that have been out there for 20 years that we're still not doing. So there are a lot of solutions that can be scaled up and have a lot of impact. So you need solutions. You need markets to work. Markets scale up things faster than anything else do. So you have to think in terms of what is it going to take to get the markets working effectively to get the scaled solutions we want. But I would argue that in order for markets to work, you have to have policy. People will make investments, people will do the things they need to do in the private sector if they have the right policies that are supporting them. And policies don't have to be heavy, hard-hitting regulation even. I would argue the one policy that I would, in the energy buildings area, is just benchmarking and labeling. I mean, who can be opposed to benchmarking and labeling? Just having information out there about how efficient different buildings are or homes are at the time of sale will be so critical. And unless you have that, you can't make a market happen. You know, if you make the investments, do you get to recover it when you sell the building or when you rent the next time? If you don't have good information, people won't make the investment. And I think we just need to find those levers where, you know, again, can we get the local mayor or city council to say buildings above a certain size should have to disclose on an annual basis what the energy bill was? You know, get utilities to cooperate with those building owners in making that available. You know, that's all doable. People are doing it, but it's just a tool, a simple policy tool at the local level that can help drive the market conditions so people will want to figure out how to make money making the investments in those buildings. If you don't have that basic information, people who make the right decisions can't monetize it, can't figure out how to recover that cost when they sell the building or rent a space. Because they can't say, well, this is more efficient, you're going to be paying less on your energy bill, and therefore the rent is going to be maybe slightly higher, but it is a overall lower operating cost. So we have to look at policies in that way in terms of the local level, in terms of what drives the investment. I'm bouncing around. Back to the federal level for a second. Even though we're not winning on the big issues, people should not think we don't win ever. I mean, even in the last year, after 20 years of fighting on fuel economy standards for vehicles, we finally did get fuel economy standards for vehicles, and Detroit is thriving in part because there was this bargain made at the time of the bailout that, yes, there's a bailout, but you have to make more efficient cars. And that work started at the state level. California was leading the charge. Northeast states joined in. So there was a lot of activity for a long period of time, a lot of litigation to defend that authority that resulted in the administration being able to finally get out there with fuel economy standards. Similarly with rules for mercury emissions from power plants. These are examples I'm giving mostly because we may not be winning in Congress in terms of getting new legislation passed, but we're able to get policies and regulations in place because people have been at it for 10 or 20 years, and you have to kind of get those things happening. So a lot of what you're seeing in terms of investments in clean energy at the state and local level on power plant side is because the mercury rule is going to be out there and people have to reduce mercury emissions from power plants. And that, in local communities, that also means, will your local utility look at energy efficiency as an alternative when they may have to shut down a local power plant? Right? How are those things going to play out in terms of the implementation? So even that policy will have reverberations in terms of what is the alternative to a coal plant? Do you invest more in it? Do you reduce the mercury? Do you look for efficiency? Do you look for renewables? But those kind of policies are going to be out there. And there is hopefully soon going to be also some regulation on carbon emissions. It's going to start with new power plants if they're being built, but hopefully eventually, even through regulatory process, not legislation, something that will apply to existing power plants as well. So a lot of different tools that are available. Let me go back and focus again on the area that I spend the most time on, which is energy efficiency in existing buildings. And I think that the key tools in terms of how to both get it to happen in your community, and I think what we're spending a lot of time trying to now figure out is how to also replicate it and have it happen not just in one cities or 5 cities, or how do you take it to 20, 50, 100 cities? And that's a huge challenge for all of us. We all talk about case studies, toolkits, webinars, lots of ideas on how to share good information. And I think all those things are needed. But I think one of the things we're also learning is even when leadership is there and people want to do the right thing, this stuff is not, it's still hard to do. And hard to do in terms of at scale and do it well. So I think when we look at so if New York City is doing something, Mayor of Chicago definitely wants to do the same thing and do it better. What will it take? How can you take the learning from here and apply it somewhere else? And you can't do it, in 500 places, but you can certainly, I would argue, be strategic. Find 10 or 20 places, have regional hubs. But I would argue you need real full-time expert kind of pro bono SWAT teams that can go in. If somebody wants to do something, you can send them 3 to 5 people for 3 months and say, okay, here they are. Go work on this, go work on that. And I think that we have to think in terms of those kind of resources that have to be made available to cities and community colleges and others. And it sounds like it may take a lot more money than we have, but it's really not. I think there are people looking for big ideas to say, if I had to make an investment of $5 million and wanted to really help scale this up, what would I want to invest that $5 million in? I mean, what is the business plan here? What do the community colleges want to take to a large funder or donor and say, give me $5 million. If I had it, I could do X, Y, Z. And this is the theory of change. What is your theory of change? What is it that if people made the investment of time, effort, and resources, what would they be investing in as a community, as a group? What would you want them to invest in so you could achieve all the things you want to achieve? So I do think it's important to think in terms of replicability and scale. What is the model? How do you want to do it? What would it take? Who could we go to together and collectively to make that happen? And in the philanthropic community, it's not just the foundations. I mean, the foundations have been very important, but the foundations are playing a smaller role now compared to some of the very large donors out there. And if you look at some of the bigger donors who are interested in these issues, they're looking for the business model approach. They're saying, I'm willing to make an investment. What would it take? I mean, recently, a large donor put in $50 million to create a new effort called Advanced Energy Economy. It's actually to work at the state and local level to help build the networks for clean energy economy. And the idea is to work for local business partners, local other stakeholders, whatever it takes to kind of make that happen. Again, believing that winning on the ground is key. You have to bring in a lot of partners, and these local chapters are just getting started. They're looking for the right places to invest. But this, and this donor can do more. This $50 million is just an initial investment to help cultivate and create, solutions on the ground. And community colleges have to be a part of it, I would argue. And it's important to find out where these networks are starting and how to be part of that conversation, and to have your own plan and strategy ready to go. I'll leave for questions any of the more specific details around policies. I mean, we can talk about, PACE financing. We can talk about lots of other mechanisms that are possible that still are challenged because, there was pushback, as you know, on PACE from FHFA. And so we were part of a litigation effort to overturn that. There's a federal legislative effort to overturn that. You can still do commercial PACE because that's not prohibited. So there's there's effort to do that. So, just on PACE alone, there are a lot of different things that are going on in terms of if you think that is the vehicle. I would say going back to the utilities is one of the most important policy areas to play in. It can get very complicated and very technical, but it is very important that the utilities have their rules changed. Under the current model, utilities make more money the more they sell. You know, in many states now, you have changed the rules, not enough, probably about a handful, that the utilities' revenues and profits are not tied to sales. And the utilities are they're not actually opposed to that. A different business model, different way for them to make money. If they can make money by helping you save energy, and it helps their shareholders are made, you know, get the profits, they're not opposed to it. How does one work with the utility to change their business model so they can actually make more money selling less rather than make more money by selling more? Is a very important policy tool. We've been working on that for 20 years. We're in 20 states trying to do it. It's not easy to do, but it's necessary. And so, you know, so benchmarking and labeling, PACE financing and other strategies for financing, you know, utility regulatory models, I mean, are, I think, some of the higher priorities in terms of what needs to happen for us to scale up at least the energy efficiency part in existing buildings in communities. So it's not just the community doing, I mean, not the community college doing the right thing, but the entire community doing the right thing. And that's what's going to be, I think, the most important piece of the puzzle in terms of creating the demand to help employ the people that are being trained. I mean, the other thing that you know, a lot of people talk about workforce development and training, which is very, very important, but as an economist, I know that it's demand that creates supply. You have to have the demand. You can have a lot of workforce and a lot of well-trained people, but if people aren't demanding their services, then it's not going to work. And so these issues of benchmarking, financing, and other policies that are strategic and local, and that's how you have to sell it to people. It's like, why are you doing this? You know, you're not policy people. So why, you know, that's somebody else's job. This is about creating the demand for the jobs that the colleges are training people for. If people aren't going to, there's not going to be demand out there in the marketplace, then what's all this workforce development and training about? And so I would go back to tie the policies at the local level that are very specific and targeted, and the less kind of grandiose and less theoretical they are, the more you can get those policies, I would argue, and they have to be focused around markets are not going to work if people don't have information. PACE is all about local financing. It's not Washington telling people what to do. And by the way, there's bipartisan legislation in Congress to fix the PACE problem. And if people could just get behind that even, that's a piece of legislation that could pass because it's Washington, it's basically even the most conservative person saying, why did the federal government say to local governments they could not do this? You know, it's about local empowerment. And you have to sell it as local empowerment, people choosing to invest in efficiency and renewables. So federal legislation might be a way to go, but it's all about if that was, you know, if you have information, you have financing, you can create demand and put people to work. And information can be locally required. The PACE financing can be done federally and sold in a very bipartisan way because it's a very conservative idea that local communities should be able to raise their own money to make the investments in their communities. I'll stop there. I could go on, but I'm happy to take your questions and look forward to the conversation.
All right, so questions, and again, as Ashok said, some of your questions may be very specific to your area or maybe more general, but let's fire away.
Yes.
I think I have more of a comment rather than a question, but when working with sustainability in normal years, I've found that sustainability always loses when we try to compete in larger situations. And so I think the model that we should be advertising is we're not here to compete, we're here to work with, so that we can provide reliable alternatives for our communities and for the people who purchase these. And so, and I found discussions can go much farther when you pose it in that way rather than, well, hey, we're here to take over your business, big oil. conversations kind of stop there because they do have so much political power and they do have so much financial power. So,
I think that's why on the power sector side, at least on electricity, the business model I'm talking about is work with the utilities to basically reward them for working with their customers to make them more energy efficient. So they don't see distributed generation and efficiency under the current business model, they lose money, and they are actually ready to move to the new business model. And it's the regulators that are mostly standing in their way. And if one could form the right partnerships, one could change that business model quite easily, believe it or not, if the stakeholders were weighing in on a changed business model. So you're not taking the utilities on directly in this case. You're basically saying, we understand under the current system where you're regulated, the way you're regulated now, you make more money if if you sell more. And therefore that just has to change if you're going to go in a different direction. So I agree that you need to find that way. I think on the oil side, which is less a local issue and more of a regional and national issue in terms of alternatives to oil, not that it can't be done at the local or state level, it has to be sold as more, we have to have, having homegrown energy resources. What can you generate locally? So if you can have wind and solar generated electricity and electric vehicles, if you can have, cellulosic ethanol and biofuels or natural gas vehicles. So if you can kind of sell it as, it helps the local economy to use local resources. And so homegrown fuels and alternatives to oil is a good way to think about it rather than taking on the industry directly. Even though the goal is, oil is a monopoly in the transportation sector, and that's why they have so much pricing power. And as demand, it's a commodity, global commodity priced, by local demand, global demand and supply. China demand, India demand, constrained supply will keep prices high and keep getting higher in the next many years. The more we can think about what can be done locally for alternatives that can kind of help move in the opposite direction. It's going to be a longer term strategy, but that's the way to deal with the oil question, I would argue, in terms of building a broader coalition. Yes?
There were two recommendations that you shared that I'm wondering how it would look in practice. So for example, one of the two policies that you thought would be especially helpful is more labeling and benchmarking, more information. Do you mean something like raising the bar on the Energy Star labeling, or what specific kinds of information should we be pushing for?
Yeah, the simplest thing would be, on the commercial building side, it's requiring buildings above a certain size, whether it's 5,000, 10,000 square feet, to annually have to report what the energy use of that building is. So it would be up on a website, Department of Buildings, or somebody would basically collect that information and make it available. So it's really a transparency issue in terms of having people know what the energy use of a building is. On the residential side, it could be done at the time of sale. Basically, at the time of sale, the information on the energy use of that house has to be made available. That's just a way for the market to then value an efficient home versus an inefficient home, and then be able to make the decision about, somebody who put a lot of efficiency measures in it can actually say, look, you're going to have lower operating costs. It creates some value around a more efficient home. Right now, without any information, somebody could have a super efficient home and have an inefficient home, and in appraisals and any other market factors, that's not valued. So unless you have information in the marketplace, those who are making the right decisions don't get rewarded for making the right decision without that. So it's just basic information. Energy Star, you said, is just an example of a tool and a way to create a score for your building. This would actually be a requirement that buildings above a certain size in commercial would have to use the Energy Star tool to create that score that would be made available. And utilities, again, are going to be very important players. If you have a building that's got large building with multiple tenants, it's hard for an owner to aggregate the total energy use of a building, whereas a utility could actually make it available. and deal with the privacy concerns, because you're not sharing any one bill. You're just saying, here's the aggregate energy use of the entire building. In Chicago, Commonwealth Edison, the utility, does do that. If any building owner wants that information, they'll make it available. So I think there are ways for utilities to have to then cooperate for the larger buildings and making that data available. But this is about just information and transparency. And people can structure it for local conditions. So part of it will be, you know, what can get done. So there's no pre-prescribed cookie cutter approach. The idea is you can do it based on size, you can do it at time of sale, you can do it in other ways depending on just getting the conversation started. You could even go to 20 building owners, get them to agree to do it voluntarily. But I think the idea is to getting information in the marketplace is so key. Yes?
Okay, so as somebody whose salary is supported by public institutions, we're not allowed to lobby. So it's a little challenging, but we do, I have accepted seats on advisory committees that can influence policy, and so in a way that's kind of a way around it. And so, for instance, the International Code Council was in Charlotte, North Carolina a couple years ago, and I sat on that with a group of other North Carolinians. We made huge changes in building code. And the same thing happened in the North Carolina building code is now 20% more efficient. So whereas it's hard to be an advocate on a public policy place, if you kind of participate in the policy formations, it's a way to have an impact.
Well, the word lobbying is a very technical term. Certainly, so one can get involved in policy development. One can have students work on developing policies. So lobbying is, after a bill's been introduced and you're calling people saying, pass this bill, versus doing all of the thinking and conversations around what about this, what about that. And once people kind of buy into it, then somebody else, can get it done. And you're always working in partnership when you're working on policy anyway. So the question is, who else can do different things that one can't do? So you're absolutely right. So being an advisor, having the conversation, being a convener for good ideas, lots of ways to get policy teed up without having to, quote, lobby specifically.
Although in some cases, your institution may, right? You have your legislative affairs of folks who may get involved in particular situations depending on what they are. Lately here in Kansas, we've been spent a lot of time talking about keeping guns out of our schools, right? So trying to find time on the legislative affairs guys' calendar for our issues sometimes was somewhat challenging. Another round of applause, please, for